And coming up on this week's show, Flying Scotsman does have a future on the main line. We talk to the National Railway Museum about plans for the world-famous locomotive. And where now for HS2? The Public Accounts Committee asks what benefits can be salvaged from the project, and we speak to the former project chairman, Allan Cooke CBE. And does the Royal Train have a future after all? So welcome to Green Signals from me, Nigel Harris, and as ever,
from me, Richard Bowker.
And off we go again, our weekly train chat, Richard. Always look forward to it. Our first big story this week relates to the most famous steam locomotive in the world, Flying Scotsman. We announced a couple of weeks ago that dates and details have been released for Scotsman's activities for the first part of this year. But lots of questions still remain in people's minds about what's happening with the locomotive and when we might see it again hauling mainline tours. So we decided to have a chat to the National Railway Museum, and Richard and I were lucky enough earlier this week to get a chance to speak with their head of locomotion, Sarah Price. Okay, Sarah, we're here in Railway 200 year, which is a truly momentous year for Britain's railway. We can argue about which was first and everything else, but this is regarded as the 200th anniversary of ground zero for the modern railway. And there's probably no more iconic symbol of Britain's railway past than Flying Scotsman, the world's best-known steam locomotive. Can you just tell us a bit about what the plans you've got for the A3 this year and the role it will play when we celebrate this fantastic anniversary?
Yeah, of course. So, we all know that Flying Scotsman acts as it's a brand ambassador, isn't it? For railways, for steam getting out there for heritage railways. It's a fantastic kind of role model in that sense. So what we want to do this year is to try and make sure that Flying Scotsman is seen by as many people as possible. We know it has that core loyal audience, people who will turn up to see it all the time. But what we want to do is make sure that it's used as an attractor for new audiences. We had that real success in 2023 with all the centenary celebrations where brand awareness really grew. So what we want to do this year is to build on that. So we're trying to work with our new custodians to get it to be seen at heritage railways across the country. I'm absolutely delighted, as you can imagine, that it's coming back to the National Railway Museum in April over the Easter holidays, and it'll be coming back to locomotion over the summer festival as well that we've got planned. So the idea is that let's get it out there, let's get it seen by as many people as possible. Really, let it continue to be that great kind of pull for visitors.
Now, you mentioned 2023 there, Sarah, and which is actually, I think, very relevant. When you look at the programme that's been announced so far, you obviously mentioned it coming back to York and to locomotion. I think it's going to spend some time at Didcot. It does still feel quite a light programme so far compared to, say, what we saw in 2023, where I think it even pulled the Royal Train, didn't it? I mean, it had a very extensive programme. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Is there a reason for that, why so far it's quite a light programme that focuses mainly on heritage railways?
So what we wanted to do this year was, we've changed custodians. We went out kind of last year. We appointed Northern Steam Operations Limited. And what we wanted to do was to really focus on that first 6 months of this year to kind of make sure that they felt comfortable doing it. It's a new relationship for us all. And we've worked really closely with them to try and make sure that it's seen in different places of the country as well. That's one of the things we're really keen to do. So yes, it might look a little bit kind of light in comparison, but at the moment it's just we've got room to grow that program. And in fact, I'm having a meeting later this week about kind of the second half of the year and where Flying Scotsman should visit.
Okay, because the two words that don't appear in any of your answers there are mainline rail tours. What are the biggest challenges these days in operating Flying Scotsman? A 1923 vintage machine, ostensibly, both on heritage railways, but also the main line. I mean, I keep up to date these days with steam things, not largely by reading the stuff that the likes of Nick Broderick write in Trackside, which is covered it month after month after month. And it does seem fair to say it caused a lot of controversy through no fault of its own, and despite everyone's very obvious best efforts. It must be quite the headache to organise and operate.
I mean, all operating vehicles cause their own kind of little challenges, don't they? And I always say, we've just it feels as though it's going to go slightly off the point, but I promise it's not.
Okay.
We've just moved, I've done over 1,000 vehicle moves to try and get everything into position in two of the halls here and some of the enabling moves in York as well. And it felt that every single vehicle moved in a slightly different way. So and that is a real challenge. When we think about Scotsman, it is part of the national collection, although it operates. We need to make sure that it is preserved for future generations. I wouldn't want to be the person who is responsible for kind of taking it off operation. So what we want to do is take it slowly in terms of doing it. It's not been doing any mainline operations last year, so we want to introduce it gradually. We want to make sure that it's being looked after in that way as well. So we definitely want to do more mainline charters, but as you say, they do come with the issues. Trespass obviously remains a challenge for everybody, not just with Flying Scotsman, but for all operations. But it's certainly our ambition to get it back out there doing those mainline charters.
Because it's boiler certificates just ticking away, isn't it?
Yeah. So we've got it expires in I think it's 29.
Yes, it does.
So and in the new contract it is specified to have another overhaul there. So it is longer term. That's the direction of travel that we want it to go in.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, Sarah. So in the contract there is a specification that in 2029 it'll have another overhaul to enable another mainline boiler certificate. That's the plan.
Yeah, that's the plan. We wanted to make sure that that it was in the contract, so that we could to give Northern Steam the confidence, but actually to give kind of all the audiences who are so interested in Flying Scotsman that confidence as well. That's our ambition.
Oh, that's brilliant, because that's kind of answered the next question I had, really, which was when you look back a little bit in time, and there's always a danger of doing that because it is the past. But, if you think back to Railfest in 2004, quite a lot of effort had gone into Flying Scotsman. Obviously, there was the workshop, there was the facilities at York. I think the plan then, if I'm right, was to run to Scarborough quite regularly, because that was quite a nice bit of line that you could show it. And it kind of seems to have changed over time. And these things do develop over time. And I was going to say, are we looking at a future where maybe it's more of a static exhibit with the occasional foray out rather than mainline operation? But you've just kind of said, no, actually, mainline operation is part of our longer term strategy even now.
Yeah, it really is. And what we've done in this contract as well is we have upped the number of days it can do mainline operation as well. So it used to do 15, we've upped it to 20 to give Northern Steam and the opportunity to do that. They don't have to use all those days if they don't want to. But yeah, we want to see it kind of out there. I mean, personally, I would love to see us doing kind of more of those short runs rather than just the long ones, because just in terms of accessibility and inclusivity, it opens it up to an audience who might not be able to kind of afford it or have that time commitment to do the longer runs. But there's nothing like riding behind Scotsman, is there? There's just something special about it.
It does. Can I just ask for a bit of clarification on something you said, if I've understood it properly? After Richard's question about another mainline tour, did you say you do plan to, if you like, pull it out of service in 2029? Because it could do another 3 years on heritage railways, couldn't it? So you're saying it is your intention to stop it in 29 and get straight on with a new 10-year boiler certificate?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, at the moment that is in the contract, that it's there to do that overhaul in there. I mean, I might not be around in 2029 to do it, but the contract runs until 2032.
Yeah.
Because what we wanted to do was to make sure that it has the overhaul and then it goes back out.
because a lot of people, owners, want to squeeze everything out of it and have that last 3 years of earning money running around on heritage railways. Okay, because obviously a huge amount of money's been spent on Flying Scotsman over the years. I think it's somewhere about thick end of £7 million up to now to buy it and overhaul it. It had its new boiler certificate in 2022, and we all know that's a hideously expensive thing to do, yet it's barely turned a wheel since. I mean, why is that? Have the ongoing costs of operation and the challenges, which are completely understandable, as Richard said, changed your priorities and strategy?
No. I mean, I think it was just kind of a timing issue.
Okay.
Really, the previous custodial contract ran out at the end of 23, and then what we wanted to do is, I'm always really, really kind of aware of the fact that it is a really important engine. It's part of the national collection. We need to give it that care that it deserves to make sure we do it. So, contract negotiations took probably, a little bit longer than we anticipated, but it was about getting it right to make sure that, the engine has a sustainable future, that we've got a really good partnership going forward. So yes, so it didn't do as much running last year as it had done because of that contract negotiation. But what was really interesting is we did some kind of stats on it, and it was seen, we think, by over 300,000 people last year across both our museums. So it's still being seen. It's still kind of building that audience for when it gets out there, just in a slightly different way last year.
Got it. Last question from me then, because it leads on nicely from that. You teased us a little bit at the beginning of this conversation, Sarah, by saying, look, you've kind of focused on the first half of the year, and there's now meetings and discussions about the second half of the year, which I completely understand. Is it therefore too cheeky to say there's still a serious possibility of some more mainline appearances in the second half of the year as part of those discussions?
That's certainly the conversations that we want to have, and that's not just us. That's also Northern Steam are wanting to have those conversations. I mean, I love watching Flying Scotsman pootle down our little running line at between about 5 miles an hour, and I still think it looks magnificent, but nothing beats seeing it when it's going doing what it was designed to do, and kind of doing those really big long runs at those higher speeds. It just looks magnificent, and that's what we absolutely want to do, and balance with that with getting as many people to see it as we can. We want hopefully pop in a couple more Heritage Railway visits as well.
Okay. Seeing it like that certainly stirs the soul. I mean, I've always been a believer that the steam locomotive is the nearest thing to a living machine we've ever invented, and to see it at full chat is awe-inspiring. So good luck with that. Just a couple of points for me before we close. I was really encouraged to hear you say about Scarborough, because I've always felt that doing a couple of 50-mile hops to Scarborough each day doesn't strain the engine, doesn't overstretch it. Lots of people to see it, and of course it always comes home, doesn't it? So
yeah.
And if you've got people turn up in the museum and say, "Where's Flying Scotsman?" So if you go outside just to the station, in 10 minutes it's pulling a train. So that does strike me as the best of all worlds. And who knows, even LNER might be interested in some sort of tie-up, because if people want to ride on Flying Scotsman to Scarborough, what have they got to do? They've got to buy one of LNER's tickets, haven't they? Just one absolute last one from me. Richard made the point about the museum has done away with a workshop, and we'll not get into the rights and wrongs of that. But what it does mean is, if there is a problem, you could always call it back to the museum as its home engineering major facility. You could drop a set of wheels out and you got the skills to do all that. You can't do that now. Where's the sort of workshop of choice going to be, should there be a requirement by you and Northern Steam to get it onto a wheel lathe or a wheel drop or an overhead crane or something?
Yeah, so Northern Steam, they're working with DB Cargo to use their engineering depots as bases in the interim, and I know they're looking longer term at kind of different bases that would allow them to be more flexible, I guess, in terms of where they use it.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Sarah. Really appreciate the time you've spent on that. I think a lot of people will come away from that conversation really positive and optimistic that there's a plan, it's in good hands, and there's a really positive future, potentially even out on the main line as well. So that's great stuff. Sarah, thank you so much, and good luck with the rest of the negotiations and the year, of course.
And keep us posted, Sarah. Bye for now.
I will.
Cheers. Bye.
So, what do you think of that, Richard? I was a bit surprised. I was expecting more, how shall I put it, reticence about a long-term mainline future, which would be understandable, but there was none of it, was it? She was very gung-ho, if I might put it like that.
How brilliant was she? Locomotion is in great hands. That's all I can say. I know. I agree with you. It was clear, it was direct, and it was really positive. So I think anybody was not sure about whether the National Rail Museum have got a strategy to have that locomotive on the main line for quite a number of years to come can worry no more.
Well, probably the most significant thing that she said in that regard, with regard to the detail of how it works, its boiler certificate expires in 2029. But it could run on for a further 3 years on heritage railways. But the fact she was very clear and said, no, 2029, it comes out of service for a 10-year rebuild, was pretty definitive, wasn't it?
It was, and it's great because the accountants, guilty as charged, would probably go at 2029. Oh, I tell you what, we've still got 3 years left. So we don't have to spend any capital. We can just milk this now for 3 years on heritage lines and then worry about it. And you get a great sort of net return. So to say, no, actually, we're not going to do that. We're going to actually consider investing in a new boiler certificate for the main line. That's a big commitment, and that is positive.
And speaking of in defence of accountants for once, I don't regard it as milking it for 3 years. If you've done 7 years on the main line, you've spent a lot of money and you've earned some, but in 3 years' time, there is an enormous bill. And so to spend 3 years earning some much earned income from relatively lighter duty work on heritage railways is what most owners go for. So the fact that they're not doing that, I think it's very clear. There is, however, an enormous elephant in the room on all this, which I think we need to get into on the show. And that's carriages. There are only 4 mainline operators. They've got their own carriages, or carriage sets are related to them. There are no Mark 1s available. I think the time is coming when there's some Mark 2s and Mark 3s available, where there's maybe going to be a shift in how mainline steam works from being, if you like, the authentic looking train set for enthusiasts to something more maybe tailored to what the market is now, which is ordinary folk, if I might put it like that, just looking for a decent day out.
And isn't that a really important point, that in the end, those of us who quite like to see that sort of historical recreation, I suspect are a smaller percentage. It is very much what Steve Oates said in his interview, the Chief Executive of the Heritage Railway Association, which we've published on the channel, which people can now see. He said, look, in the end, if you want to be sustainable, you've got to go where the market's going. And that's the point, really, isn't it?
It is a small market. I'm smiling to myself here because I can't believe I'm about to say the next few words. But some of our viewers and listeners will remember David Ward, who was BR's steam supremo. And old Wardy, as he was known, was absolutely inflexible on this. He hated people having windows open because it let char blow in, and non-enthusiasts were in the cold and the draft and all the rest of it. And he was always very concerned about those very customers, and there are even fewer of the enthusiast lot now. So here we go, David. If you're watching, Wardy was right, maybe, and I know how much that will amuse you.
A man ahead of his time.
Let's not encourage him too much. Anyway, our second big story this week, is HS2 and publication of a truly damning report by the Public Accounts Committee on Friday, February 28th last week. Regular listeners will recall we covered the oral evidence session by the PAC on HS2 a few weeks ago, when the DFT, as well as Mark Wilde, the new chief executive of HS2, gave evidence. The headlines were inevitable. Once the PAC had published its report, the press release for which had the ridiculous title, "Where Now for HS2?" PAC urges government to set out what benefit can be salvaged for the taxpayer. Really, It's a ridiculous title. Salvage is just a word designed to grab a headline, and my goodness, it worked. Talk about wanting to have your moment in the sun with the most negative take you could possibly put on things. Interestingly, though, the press release also said, you actually read it, it is ultimately the Department for Transport that has failed to manage this enormous project and manage HS2 properly. This is likely to have wasted billions of pounds of taxpayers' money in delays and overspends. The department, as well as resetting the project, must now reset itself to manage this project to a workable conclusion in line with the eventually agreed budget and timescale. To do this, they will need to employ people with the correct range of skill sets to critically supervise and oversee this huge project. This is the only way to salvage its severely tarnished reputation. We expect to see a real improvement when we next examine this matter. The notion of asking the department to reset itself is an interesting one. So, Richard caught up with Allan Cooke CBE, chair of HS2 from 2018 to 2021, who is famously plain speaking when talking about the project. In this interview, he's very direct and it's worth playing in full. Just one thing, we did have a small audio issue in the chat with Allan on a couple of occasions, so you will hear the odd crackle. But do not adjust your sets, just sit back and enjoy. Here it is.
I mean, this Public Accounts Committee report that came out into HS2, we'd heard quite a bit of the hearings ahead of it. Do you think overall it was kind of a fair report, or was it really just a bit of grandstanding?
Well, first of all, Richard, thanks very much for inviting me onto the podcast. The report itself, I read the report on Thursday, and I'd had no previous inside information on it. I've been in contact with Mark Wilde, but effectively, what I thought was it was not balanced. The report itself was not balanced. Of course, there was massive amount of criticisms about the challenges that HS2 faced and the fact that the Department of Transport and HS2 Limited were not working effectively together, a lack of communication. But there was nothing in there, in the report itself, that actually gave us an indication, gave the committee really the progress that we have made, or that HS2 have made and the department have made over the last couple of years. And it has been absolutely phenomenal. HS2 produced a report in January this year about the progress that had been made throughout 2024, and it is quite remarkable what they have actually achieved. At no point in time did they turn around and say, "Well, actually, this is how you should do it." You know, I mean, there was no point in time in the report that said there was a number of recommendations, quite a number of recommendations on the report itself. But at no point in time did they turn around and say, "Look, this isn't how we should. This is a case study in how not to run a program." But there was no indication that says, "Okay, if this is the way to run a program, this is how you're going to run a program.
Yeah,
this is how you should." And so I think it was imbalanced.
I think that's very fair. All the bad, but none of the positive, and no real kind of help.
Yeah,
I suppose in terms of looking forward. One of the interesting things I did spot. So in the Public Accounts Committee hearings that were held when they were evidence gathering before they wrote this report, was the session that Mark Wilde did with some senior DFT officials, and he said that in his view, and he was very honest. He said, "I'm relatively new to this. I haven't been at the project very long." But he said, "My sense is that there's a couple of fundamental problems. One, construction kind of started way too early, really, before designs were mature. And second, the contracts moved the risk to HS2 to manage, but then they didn't do that effectively. And now what we need to do is a big kind of reset of the program." Do you think that point, particularly about the designs not being mature enough, is a fair one, or was it in reality there were so many unknown unknowns? Could they have been any more mature than they were?
No, I think, first of all, I've reached out to Mark, and I've suggested, and he has agreed, to let's meet up and compare notes, as it were. More than happy to do that, because fundamentally, Richard, I think this is a fantastic program. And oh, by the way, I thought that Mark did a superb job in completing Crossrail and the Elizabeth line, and he is a perfect appointment, following on from Mark Thurston. But actually, I don't agree. I think it was, there are too many unknowns. I mean, really, I one of the first things I did was, when I joined HS2, was I did what we call a stock take of where we were. And at that particular point in time, we should absolutely, and I said that at the time, we should recognise that this program, at the time in 2016, really only around about less than 4% was actually the scope and the cost of the program was down to what we would call basically done by professional services. It was done on estimates. It was done basically on previous experiences. So it was only really down to the 3.5%. At that particular time, less than 4% at that particular point in time. So I think that, and of course, in 2009, when it was started, when it was evolved, the scope was set out by the Department for Transport, by the government, and then they appointed and they created HS2 Limited to actually execute on the program itself. HS2 Limited were never set up to actually do the scope, or indeed the way that it was actually going to be run as an operation. HS2 was responsible for the implementation of the plans. So I don't think Mark is absolutely accurate in that particular point in time. I'm not certain how we could have done this. And when he said that we started way too early before the design was matured, I mean, it was still going through maturity in 2018 when I joined the organisation. So I think really, if we were to wait until the design had been matured, or matured more effectively, we probably wouldn't have had spades in the ground until maybe 2 or 3 years ago.
Wow. Okay. And I suppose the answer is you kind of learn as you go, don't you? Because there's so much that because of those unknowns. Look, one of the things in the report that was particularly damning was the committee's view of the role of the DFT in terms of their oversight and sort of sponsoring of the program. And it sort of suggested that they'd not discharged their duties effectively. I mean, I don't know. This is always a real challenge, because this is such a complex program. I mean, can any government department, this isn't about the DFT, can any government department populated by people who don't have a lot of commercial experience or major project experience, is it fair to ever expect a government department to discharge that kind of role? And I suppose the PAC have said, and now the DFT have got to get the oversight model right this time. I mean, is that even realistic to expect that they can?
Well, I think it is an extremely difficult task to actually provide the oversight. When I took over as chairman from Sir Terry Morgan in 2018, the board of directors had been significantly reduced, and it was touch and go whether actually we had a quorum in the board itself, and so we actually reconstituted the HS2 Limited Board, and that was one of the first tasks that Chris Grayling asked me to do, to strengthen and reconstitute the board. in that board from then on, from 2018 onwards, during my tenure as chairman, we had representatives from the Department of Transport at every board meeting. We had sitting on our board of directors as a board member, as a fully fledged board member, the senior independent director from the Department of Transport. And then, of course, we also had oversight from Treasury. So I think that we had significant input, and it was all transparent. The Department of Transport got all of the papers that associated with it at every board meeting. And in addition to that, of course, we had the internal meetings with the Department of Transport. And so I struggled to see how on earth we could have provided as HS2 Limited more transparency, more explanations. Mark Thurston and the executive team spent a significant portion of their time really answering questions or providing papers or reviews into the department and subsequently into Treasury, of course, to make sure that there was the oversight. So I struggled to see, Richard, how on earth HS2 Limited, or indeed the Department of Transport, could have provided a more meaningful, more robust position with regard to this than we had and continue to have.
Gosh, I mean, it does rather suggest that, they knew they had all the information, and yet we kind of still end up with the position we've got. I mean, it will be a challenge sort of thinking through that oversight model going forward, because I'm slightly nervous that the government's sort of view is when something goes wrong, we need more oversight, we need more committees, we need more papers. And the downside, the risk of that is, in the end, you just suffocate the thing that you're trying to get Mark Wilde to lead and deliver. Is that fair?
Well, absolutely fair. We certainly don't need more reviews, more oversight. We need to give clear direction. Bear in mind, this is taxpayers' money that we are dealing with. We always remember that, and so it's understandable. But if we set out and give very clear direction about what the expectation is for the implementation and execution of the program to HS2 Limited, and then let Mark and his team get on with the job, that will be a major step forward. And I think what Mark will, I don't know this, but I assume that Mark would actually say, in subsequent PSC meetings, that effectively, we have allowed the organisation with some very, very clear guidelines and direction to really fulfil our requirements. And those requirements were to deliver the programme on time, on schedule, and at the right cost. Of course, in the PSC report, it refers to the fact that there is disagreement between what the department says about phase one in terms of cost and what HS2 Limited are saying about cost. And I'm absolutely certain that not only the department, but Treasury isn't really mentioned in the report that I saw. But Treasury are putting a lot of pressure and have put a lot of pressure on the department to work within a specific envelope. And sometimes, as you mentioned earlier, Richard, about unknown unknowns or known unknowns, they're quite. I mean, I just read an article this morning about the Bat Tunnel, which is now estimated to cost in excess of, I think it was £112 million, which is the latest estimate. And of course, people, rightly so, the public will turn around and say, how on earth can we, number one, spend that sort of money on a bat tunnel? And secondly, how can we get it so wrong from the initial estimates? And I think that this, we need to understand all of this. I think the John Armitt mentioned recently about, we do know how to run these large programs. We absolutely do know how to. What we don't do very well is actually we don't actually really fully understand what the implications are, and how we deal with the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns.
Yeah.
These are the things that really cause us to, I think, create this situation where between the department and the company, how we actually get that right.
Final question then, right? So, if you mentioned Mark Wilde, who delivered Crossrail in the end. If you now walk any station on the Elizabeth line, as we call it, and ask people, do you feel that we slightly overspent on this project, or it was worth a delay? They're just kind of looking at it a bit weird, really, because in the nobody, literally nobody now talks about the cost of the time of the Elizabeth line. They just bask in the glory of the fact that it's carried over 500 million passengers and it's transforming the capital city in terms of its transport network. Do you think that'll happen with HS2? Do you think we just obsess about cost to the exclusion of benefit? I suppose, is HS2 still worth doing?
In my view, HS2 is not only is it worth doing, Richard, it is absolutely essential, based upon the premises that were laid out in 2009 and strengthened throughout. From 2009 through to 2021 and now into 2025. It is absolutely essential. It's absolutely essential for capacity on the West Coast Line. It's absolutely essential for the connectivity to the Midlands and subsequently the North. And it's absolutely essential if we are really serious about reducing our carbon footprint and using clean energy for rail transportation, which I believe most strongly that HS2 will deliver on that particular promise. Yes, it will undoubtedly cost more than we think it is now. It certainly is costing more than what I estimated in my original stock take in 2018. And of course, it's now we're restricted by only the first phase. So we're not going to get the full benefit of the 2A and 2B. And subsequently, I always had, maybe I wouldn't have seen it, but I always hoped that it was going to go up the East Coast and into Scotland. I always hoped that it basically HS2 high-speed line would go that way. We're now severely restricting the benefits by curtailing phase 2 of the program. But I honestly believe that people will use HS2 effectively. It will provide a really remarkable experience. I mean, if you speak to anybody who has actually traveled on high-speed links in Europe or in the Far East, they'll tell you it is just a wonderful experience.
Yeah, I completely agree, and it is transformative.
Yeah.
Look, let's hope that let's end on a positive note. I think we both strongly agree on the benefits of it, and hopefully Mark Wilde will be able to not only reset the program, get a grip, but then be empowered and allowed to get on and deliver it, and that would be a tremendous result. So, Alan, thank you so much for spending some time with us. Appreciate your candor and your kind of directness with it. And let's hope that all of this ends up being worthwhile in the end. So thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure. Thanks, Richard.
Wasn't that remarkable? I mean, he was very direct, as you'd said in the sort of the preamble. I do want to say just one thing on this. There's nothing ever personal in these comments, right? I've known and do know an awful lot of very senior departmental officials in transport and in other departments. And to a person, they are all committed, hardworking, straightforward, and actually really almost desperate to do the right thing. Right? So let's be really clear about that. The problem, I think, is cultural and institutional, and the way that government departments think and operate. And it's back to this whole thing about trying to avoid risk rather than knowing how to manage it. They're just simply not trained and set up. There's lots of things I would like to do to make people I suppose, who are ill better, but I'm not a doctor and I never will be, and I can't do it, right? So it's that kind of issue. And I think there's a real challenge here. I don't think the department can actually reset itself, especially not in an environment with a government saying, we want more oversight, we're going to have this ministerial committee and more control. As Alan said there, what they should really now do is say, Mark Wilde, you are the leader. Lead, manage, and empower the guy to finish this particular task. That's the best chance we've got now of delivering cost control and a program that can be delivered effectively.
Just like GBR, then you've been appointed, get on with the job. And let them do it. I take your point. It's not personal. It's not critical. But it's like asking a cat to bark, isn't it? It's not something they can do.
It's very difficult, and it must be incredibly frustrating for them. I mean, who wants to turn up to a PAC and get beaten up? You know, I've been there. You don't, right? So, but it's very hard, and turning the supertank around is extremely difficult. It will be interesting to see what the reaction is, but I hope, I'm fairly low expectation, but it would be great if it could actually be less micromanagement, clear direction, clear target, but less micromanagement. I think that would have a transformational effect. We shall see.
This is what we want. Please go ahead and do it.
Yeah. Now, to prove that big things come in threes, this last week has also seen another big story, which is that regulated fares have increased by 4.6% in England and Wales. It was actually slightly less, 3.8% in Scotland. And rail cards rose by, or most rail cards rose by £5. I think the disabled person's rail card didn't. I think that remained unchanged. Now, the cries of outrage were predictable. The Campaign for Better Transport claimed that people were being priced off the railways. Michael Solomon Williams, who's the head of campaigns at the Campaign for Better Transport, said this. He said, high ticket prices were the number one barrier to getting more people travelling by rail, and called on the government to bring down fares as part of rail reforms. People are being hit hard, he said. People want to take the train and they're being priced off the railways. At the same time, fuel duty is being frozen. Government has the choice. It can choose to intervene. Now, it's more complicated than that, of course. The cost as far as the railway is concerned has gone up. Why? Volumes and yield variances since COVID is a massive issue. And we won't go through that again. We've covered it so many times. Other costs have risen, though. The railway is not immune to wider inflationary costs in the economy. But it is, where I agree with the CBT, it is a political choice.
Of course it is.
There are only two sources of primary income. It's either fares and subsidies. So if you want fares to come down, then unless yields increase and costs come down to cover that, to fund that, then guess what? The results increase subsidy. There's no other way. That is the choice.
Because that's one of the big things. I mean, in the many, many media interviews I've done about this, well, they're a lot cheaper all the way around Europe. And I used to give a variation of your answer, Rich. I said, well, we could have exactly the same low fares, but they pay more taxes, so there's more public subsidy. It's a very simple correlation. It's like the old house rates used to be. Or the council tax. There's a grant goes in from government, and the authorities have to raise what they need themselves from what's left.
Yeah.
But for years, the department and the government have been hiding behind the private sector, haven't they? Oh, well, it's these train operators. They get it in the neck, and the government used to sit on its hands and say nothing at fare increase times. But now they've nowhere to go to do that, can they?
But regulated fares have always been the purview of government, even in a privatised railway. So,
but the public and the media never saw that.
Never saw that.
And the DfT used to sit on its hands, and each time the fares went up, and I stood at King's Cross with people berating the train operators, and you try to tell them it's a government decision, but it never got through.
Nope. I still believe, Nigel, that if you run a boring, predictable, safe, reliable railway, cancellations, right, almost nothing else, I think, winds people up more than I turned up and it didn't arrive at all. Yeah.
You've partly answered the question I was going to ask you. Would you agree with him that it's a single biggest obstacle? I don't. If there was a decent service, people tend to take it on the chin, even if they grumble.
Oh, do you mean what the level of fares?
Well, it said the biggest obstacle to getting people on trains is the level of fares.
I
don't agree with that.
No, I think it's part of the mix. I think I would almost say complexity of fares is as big an issue as their absolute price level. But it is because that really does. I mean, I reckon I know my railway, my way round our railway system better than the average. I still get utterly befuddled by fares.
Me too.
Well, if that's you and me, and we've got, however many years experience, what chance a sort of a casual user? Answer, very little. So that is a big issue. But when I talk to my friends and my family and other people that I know use the railways, it's actually cancellations, the thing just not turning up and not being confident that you're going to get where you want to go probably drives people mad more than anything else. But there you go.
I agree. As in all things railway, it is not simple or binary. And now it's time to thank everyone who supports us, and we are very grateful. First of all, thanks to RIA, the Railway Industries Association, who are our first programme supporter, and to Rail Business Daily, our first media supporter. Thanks, guys. Your support, as ever, really is hugely appreciated by all three of us. Then a big thank you everyone who has left us a super thanks on YouTube this week. And you lovely people are Bob Walsh, the Independent Brigline Rail Group, Andrew Seddon, Peter Curtis, Keith Grafton, Graham Webster, Roland Harmer, Chris Exley, Paul Roberts, Marion Bloom, Mike Day, Peter Icklesheimer, and Nigel Mapston. Hopefully I've got all the names right this week. We really do appreciate all your kindness and generosity in leaving us super thanks. So seriously, thank you very, very much indeed.
Absolutely. And thanks also to our new gold and silver members who are Atlas Baudelaire, Ray Flint, and Alistair F. Scott. You can see all our members and supporters, to whom we're very grateful, in the end credits of the show. If you're a gold or silver member, please do remember to drop us an email to info@greensignals.org with your postal address so that we can get stuff sent out to you. Also worth a reminder that our merchandise store opened last week. Many of you have already...
It's doing well, isn't it?
It's doing very well. So if you've not already visited the merchandise store, do head to greensignals.org. That's our website. Click on shop in the menu at the top and you will be taken to the merchandise store.
And now it's time for this week's Railway News Roundup. Thanks to Sean Morris Armitage for this first one. It looks like the Royal train may have a future after all. Buckingham Palace launched a review into use of the train in 2022 after the Queen's death. But more than 2 years later, DB Cargo UK has confirmed it is updating the train by replacing the late Queen's cipher with that of the King. The words Queen's Messenger on the side will also be replaced accordingly. DB's chief executive, Andrea Rossi, told The Telegraph, "There's always a great sense of occasion when the Royal train is seen out on the mainline network, a sight we hope to see more frequently in years to come, particularly with His Majesty's focus on promoting sustainability and the environment." The King used the train for the first time in almost a year last week when he travelled to a royal engagement at JCB in Staffordshire and a brewery in Burton-on-Trent.
Now, here's an interesting one, Nigel. Ticket barriers that use AI or artificial intelligence could be installed at tube stations to cut down on fare dodging. They're called smart gates. What a surprise. And it's estimated they could catch up to 100,000 tailgating cheats. When somebody rushes through behind you, it happens to me all the time. The gates are designed by a company called Cubic Transportation Systems. They use AI-aided scanning software to detect people tailgating and then alert a nearby member of staff, while also keeping a record of the offence. The gates stretch from floor to shoulder height to stop people being able to slide, under or jump over them. That's clever. TfL apparently lost an estimated 130 million.
What?
In revenue to all fare dodging.
But that's a huge number.
It's quite an extraordinary number. I mean, they do carry millions and millions of people, but even so, it's extraordinary. So they've not yet confirmed, that's TfL, Transport for London, they've not yet confirmed they're going to be ordering the equipment, but they have said they're looking at the possibility of using AI in this way. So it's a really interesting piece of technological innovation. This.
Excuse me. It is indeed. And here's a good one from Brian Newton. A project known as New Dawn was announced by an organisation called Steamology, what a great word, last year. The project is to convert a Class 60 diesel locomotive to a modern form of steam power. Now, the design work has been completed and the project's backers are set to make a decision on whether to proceed in the next 2 to 3 months. The locomotive's heavy diesel engine will be replaced with a lighter system that uses modular high-pressure steam generators which burn hydrogen, along with 4 steam turbines and gas storage. It could use green hydrogen that has been produced using renewable energy. The project is seen as an option for providing zero-emission operation on non-electrified routes. Certainly worth a look.
I think we should go and have a look at that if we can. It's great, isn't it? Now, this is one that Trevor Stone alerted us to, and it's really relevant because it flows very nicely from the interview that we did with Steve Oakes, the Chief Executive of the Heritage Railway Association, which, as I mentioned earlier, is now published on our site. Network Rail and the Bluebell Railway in Sussex have signed an agreement to collaborate more closely. It's the first agreement of its kind, they say, in the south of England. Network Rail will donate redundant railway assets, with its Sussex route providing railway materials such as old rail and sleepers that are no longer needed on the main line. Their materials that would otherwise be recycled. Because railways like the Bluebell run at slower speeds, the materials can be safely reused and repurposed. Network Rail will use the Bluebell's facilities as part of its community engagement, including hosting rail experience days to help promote rail to people considering their career options. I love this. I mean, that is genuine symbiosis, isn't it, of two coming together for the benefit of all, and a really smart bit of kind of commercial thinking from the Bluebell Railway as well. Well done.
It is a bit back to the future, Richard, because it was always the case. I remember in the early 1970s when I was a volunteer on the Lakeside and Haverthwaite Railway, they were always doing deals with local areas and regions of BR for bits and pieces of equipment. An iteration of rail track or even Network Rail stopped all that when they got the March depot going and everything had to go there. But this does make perfect sense, and I hope we see more of it, because it means that materials locally can be life extended, use again, and you don't use all that energy carting them to March for scrapping and stuff. It makes absolutely perfect sense. So well done to Network Rail and the Bluebell for doing that. We really like that. And now a good bit of Railway 200 news. It's been confirmed that the touring exhibition train, known as Inspiration, will open to the public on June 27th. It will start at the Severn Valley Railway and then visit 60 locations over the following 12 months to promote rail innovation and careers through interactive displays. It's expected that more than 200,000 visitors will get to experience the train. It's going to have a unique livery and comprise 4 reconfigured Mark III coaches, which are currently being fitted out thanks to a £250,000 grant from the National Lottery Heritage Fund. GB Rail Freight is going to operate the train, and we'll put a full list of dates for the first few months on our website, and it's expected that bookings will open shortly after Easter, so do keep an eye open for that.
Absolutely. Now, there's just one breaking news story before we finish, Nigel, if we can. Several listeners, I know Anthony Thomas, Steve Roberts, David Redwell, I think others, have sent us this. Do you remember on New Year's Day, we had the whistle up for Railway 200? And I went to Bitton on the Avon Valley Railway. Absolutely. And they were really kind of welcoming. We had a great time.
You had a good day, didn't you?
Yeah, I got very wet, but it was brilliant. Anyway, they've had to put a press release out to launch an appeal, which they've called the Bounce Back Appeal, to help strengthen the railway finances. And it's come about after financial anomalies were identified after having been carried out by a former staff member. It turns out that an individual who was known to the railway as Matthew Smith, but apparently whose true identity is Nathan Hudson, who is a wanted career criminal, has potentially defrauded the railway of £50,000, which, according to the railway, was basically what they had to carry out all their winter sort of operational and maintenance work. So they've launched this thing called the Bounce Back fundraising appeal. We'll put a link to it on our website. There's also some information where if you've got any information on this character, you can provide that.
About the politest word I can come up with is scumbag.
Yeah. No, I would.
It just makes your
agree with that.
Blood boil, doesn't it?
It does.
Hopefully, you never know, some green signalers might be able to help. And that's the news roundup for this week. If you'd like to send us any snippets of news or big stories, little stories, round you, anywhere, please do send them to us. Don't assume we already hear. It's better to be told twice than not hear at all. So do let us know. And if we use your tip, we will read your name out.
Absolutely. Which means it's time to do the quiz.
Yay.
Well, you think never ask a question to which you kind of don't want to know the answer. Anyway, last week's question was this: where in the UK does a train travelling from its origin station to its destination and back again to its origin station pass through an intermediate station 4 times? Crikey, talk about opening a can of worms. First,
that'll learn you.
It will absolutely learn me. This has set a new record in terms of the number of quiz answers submitted and received. Second, big shout out. I'm immensely grateful to regular listener Richard Rosen, who has, I think, knows how to deal with addressable databases or something very clever, and has a very sharp mind. And without whom I wouldn't have been able to do this. So thank you, Richard. One challenge, and I'm just going to explain this because so many people submitted answers. We have to ask the question, does the train have to have the same head code throughout its journey? I asked that because I had thought the only correct answer was probably on the Tyne and Wear Metro or London Underground. But even there, we think the example on the Tyne and Wear Metro of a train going from St James to South Shields and back, which actually calls at Monument Station 4 times on 4 different platforms, would you believe, does have separate head codes
for the
outbound and return portion. I know. And if that's the case... This
is very rail nerdy, Richard, this week.
It's very nerdy. If we do allow 2 head codes, and I think we do,
we got
because I did say train, not a specific head-coded service, then plenty of other answers get thrown into the mix. Now, by far the most popular answer was George Mass Junction in Caithness. The northbound Inverness to Wick service goes Inverness, George Mass Junction, Thurso, George Mass Junction, and back to Wick. Then it waits a bit, and then it does the whole thing in reverse. So it goes through George Mass Junction 4 times. We also permitted Hampden Park, because a Brighton to War service via Eastbourne will do the same thing. It will stop at Hampden Park 4 times because it reverses in and out of Eastbourne. Aberdare to Merthyr Tydfil was a good one. Salisbury to Romsey via Chandler's Ford and the Loop, that's a good one. We even allowed Hammersmith to Edgware Road because the way that service operates, it goes through Paddington 4 times, but actually it's 2 different platforms in Paddington, but it's still the same station. We did not allow Manchester, Dinting, Glossop. Quite a few people said Dinting's passed 4 times. Now, unless I'm wrong, I don't think it is. I think it's only passed twice, but somebody might prove me wrong. And we did very creative. We didn't allow Haymarket on the Caledonian Sleeper on the Highlander leg, because although it does go through Haymarket 4 times, it does it on 2 separate days.
Yes.
So we thought that was a bit too much. Anyway, there were a few more we allowed, a few more we didn't. But it was quite the exercise. We put all the ones we were permitting into a hat and randomly chose one from the many, many correct answers. And the winner was John Warden. So congratulations, John. You have definitely won
John.
The hardest and biggest quiz we've ever done. So do send us your address to quiz@greensignals.org and we will get your mug to you. Phew, right, and breathe. Now, this week's quiz, I hope, is much easier, for me at least anyway, and it's this. Now, a couple of weeks ago, we asked which locomotive had carried the most names and nameplates. This week, I simply would like to know which nameplate carried by a locomotive in Britain, and it can have been on the main line or an industrial private line, that's fine, has contained the most number of characters. So it could be a steam engine from long ago, it could be something quite recent, which has carried the most number of characters on the plate. A space does not count as a character, but a punctuation mark, a number, an ampersand, all that kind of stuff does. So very simple. Which ones had the most characters in its name? As long as we can validate it, the one with the most wins. If you think you know, send us an email to quiz@greensignals.org by midday on Saturday, March the 8th. We'll put all the correct answers. I'm expecting a lot for this. In a hat, select a winner at random to receive, of course, the coveted Green Signals Quiz Winners mug.
I can hear the combined volume pages being flicked as we speak, Richard.
Do you know, when I was a kid, there was a Class 47, brush type 4 for you. There was a Class 47, number 47555, right? It was a crew diesel loco, and it was called the Commonwealth Spirit. And everywhere I went, that blooming engine appeared.
Really?
I reckon there was about 10 of them, right? All called the same thing. But I don't think that even gets close to winning, given some of the other names that I know that are out there. So there you go.
So when you, just a quick one for you, Richard, then. So when you been out on one of your spotting trips from Blackburn, did you relish those moments in the evening when you got your combined volume, your pens and your ruler, and you'd punctiliously transfer and underline all
and
the
you'd
numbers?
cop something. Absolutely brilliant. Yeah.
And if you got to cab it in red.
Me too. That's brilliant, isn't it? Yeah. There you go.
Absolutely. By gum. And here's a good story to end on. This episode is being published on March 6th, which is not only World Book Day, it's also my birthday. So
hey.
Happy birthday to me.
Happy birthday to you.
Thank you, Richard. I'm not sure he's happy. I gave up noticing him, really, but I just had to say. East Midlands Railway has launched a children's book to celebrate Railway 200 and to mark World Book Day. An adventure through Railways past follows EMR mascot Miles around EMR's network as he visits heritage locations. 6,000 copies of the storybook are being distributed to more than 70 schools across the network, and EMR employees are hosting 25 live readings of the book at primary schools. It's all designed to engage and educate young readers about the rich history of the railway in this important anniversary year, and hopefully inspire a new generation to consider a career on the railway. And how great it's been done with a book, in all the sort of kindling and new technology and all the rest. Let's hear it for books, which I've obviously got an interest in.
Absolutely. Really great initiative.
And sadly, that's all we've got time for this week. Thanks so much for watching or listening. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up, leave a comment, or if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, which really does help us a lot. And if you absolutely want to support us in another way, find out about membership on YouTube or Patreon. You'll get all sorts of cool stuff, including Richard's great videos and the odd one from me as well. But most importantly, join us again for the show next week, which will always be free. Until then, it's goodbye from me, and
it's goodbye from me.
Have a great week till then.